Hey guys, thanks for joining me here on the Come Reason podcast. I just wanted to let you know that if you enjoy these shows, you can gain access to a lot of additional content by becoming a Come Reason Defender. With your tax-deductible gift of $25 a month, you'll be able to view exclusive videos, debates, and presentations, even by top scholars such as Dr. J.P. Moreland, Sean McDowell, J. Warner Wallace, Dr. Hugh Ross, and many, many more. Plus, our Defenders Library provides PowerPoint presentations and notes used to develop these podcasts. So check it out by logging on to the comereason.org/defenders page on the website and see all the benefits your support provides. And thank you. More and more today, people have become concerned about the growing rise in evil that we're seeing across our society. We've seen terrorist attacks in the news. We notice school shootings on the rise. And generally, people are being less civil to one another. But there is a segment of the population who doesn't believe that morals as such truly exist. They are just simply something made up by people in order to keep order. Is this true? And how is a Christian to be able to understand the difference between, say, moral relativism and whether morals are real? That's the topic that we're going to jump into today on this Come Let Us Reason Together. Well, hi, everyone. Welcome again to another Come Let Us Reason Together. My name is Lenny Esposito, and today I have as a special guest a friend of mine, Dr. David Horner, who's professor of theology and philosophy over at Biola University. Dr. Horner got his PhD in philosophy from Oxford University, also has a master's in philosophy and philosophical theology from Oxford. And he's taught at Denver Seminary at the University of Oxford, also a visiting scholar and research associate at the Department of Philosophy at the University of Colorado. Now, he's been teaching for some 20 years, has a couple of books under his belt, as well as the most recent one that he co-authored with Dr. J.P. Moreland entitled Metaethics, a short companion that's put out by B&H Academic. David, welcome to the show. Glad to have you with us here today. How are you?
Thanks. It's great to be here. I'm doing pretty well. Thanks.
Well, ethics seems to be something that you've been pretty involved in, looking at the ethics of Aristotle and Aquinas. You do a lot of medieval theology and medieval philosophy. Tell us a little bit about what metaethics entails, because it might be a term that people aren't familiar with.
Yeah, and it has nothing to do with Facebook or anything like that. The word meta has become kind of an interesting word these days, but metaethics is actually one of the most exciting areas in ethics. But it's what JP and I have written is the first Christian introduction to the subject. So it's pretty fresh. Basically, metaethics is about the foundations of ethics. Its assumptions, its underlying philosophical and theological worldview commitments. If you think about ethics as a house, this would be the foundation. And then what's going on inside the house is the stuff that we usually think about in terms of ethics, about, is abortion right or wrong, and things like that. So metaethics is difficult because it involves, it directly relates to really all of the other areas of philosophy: metaphysics, epistemology, philosophical psychology, semantics, all that kind of stuff. So it's no wonder that it's untrod turf, but there's just been really a need for someone to make it intelligible to people. So that's what we're attempting to do here.
Yeah, there's and kind of as I said in the introduction, you see a couple of folks. There's a lot of people who again decry the what they would say is the moral slide of modern culture, things of that nature. But there's also a contingent of folks, and this is kind of where you come in, who say, well, wait a minute, what do you mean good and evil? You're assuming those kinds of things. One person, matter of fact, in a moral argument I was engaging with on this issue, a person says, well, evil is simply what we create, right? When we deem it evil, that's where evil comes from. So they're holding to this view that everything is kind of, I guess it's a materialist or a naturalist view that there's just simply everything's kind of inert in the universe, and evil is something that humans impose upon certain actions, and because maybe we don't like it, or we want to control someone or something like that. This is the area that you're talking about.
Yeah, so those are meta-ethical issues. So what exactly is the picture of reality that underlies the moral judgments that we make? And the fact is, that person who says so whatever we say is evil is what evil is. It's just something imposed by us. These are people who still make moral judgments, right? As C.S. Lewis said, you could talk to the most flagrant moral relativist, but when you steal his seat on the bus, he'll say that's not fair more quicker than you can say Jack Robinson. And actually, there's biblical understanding of why that's the case, as Paul writes in Romans chapter 2. The natural moral law is written on the heart of everybody. So we have a kind of intuitive sense that certain things are right and certain things are wrong, and so on. But if we have a worldview like naturalism, as you say, materialism, where the only things that are real are the sorts of things that science can, that our senses can touch or smell or see, and science can measure, then what are you going to do with good and evil and right and wrong and so on, because they don't fit into that scheme. So there's a kind of schizophrenia really in a lot of people, in that it's just unavoidable really to kind of refuse to make moral judgments and all that kind of stuff. It's so natural to us the way God has made us. And yet, at the same time, a good number of people hold to worldview commitments that rule out its actually being the case. And so it's an unsatisfying view for them, I think. It's a kind of schizophrenia. And so it's important for us not just to make good moral judgments about what's actually right and wrong, but to weigh into these debates and show that this is something real that we're talking about, and there's good reason to hold it to be real, and what's going wrong with a naturalist critique and so on.
Okay, so let's and you say it's fairly universal, and we can go back to Aristotle. He seems to have assumed that ethics are real, right? So we have I guess there's three camps. You have subjectivism, that holds that ethics are something that we create or we make, and within that big picture, it can be individual subjective ethics, or it could be a group subjective ethics. Or there's the objective idea that ethics are objective, and then you have some distinctions within that, where you have folks who are saying it's objective because it either benefits the race, or it's objective because maybe it's built into the fabric of the universe. Maybe it's just the way all people think. Have there been any societies that you know of that the subjective nature of ethics was the primary understanding that they held? In other words, was there any flourishing culture? I'm not talking about kind of a commune living outside, but can you think of any flourishing culture, any society that could actually do good stuff, that could build things, that could, things that like you need to use cooperation and stuff? Can any society flourish on a subjectivist ethical framework?
That's a great question, Lenny, and I'm not aware of any society that's flourished. I'll say two things about that, and then we can pick it up from there if you'd like. But one is that just for historical, background, if you look at the ancient Greeks and the Romans, but let's stick to the Greeks. This was a big debate among them, and the way they talked about it was the difference between nomos and phusis. Nomos means law or convention in Greek. And so there were the subjectivists, as you say, or we might say put subjectivism and relativism and all that kind of stuff in the category, the metaethical category of constructivism. It's something that humans create and impose on the world. And so the classical way of articulating that among the Greeks was to talk about nomos. It was morality was something that's created in some way by us, either by our own preferences or opinions or beliefs, or maybe a social construction of a social contract or something like that. And then the other people would say that morality is objective. It's written into the nature of things. It's a matter of phusis, where we get our word physics. It's a Greek word for nature. It's grounded in the nature of things. Now, it's interesting if you look at the folks that represent these two sides. It's all the people that did anything, like Plato and Aristotle and all those guys that held to the nama, or to the phusis side, the nature side. And it's the sophists and the skeptics and so on who really didn't build anything, who really did not construct philosophical systems or anything like that. So that's just a little historical context. Now, the other thing I'd mention is there was a Harvard sociologist who came from the Soviet Union named Piotr Sorokin, who wrote a book many years ago. I'm not sure his exact dates. Earlier in the
I think it was the 30s, 1930s.
Yeah, I think earlier in the 20th century. And his view was that there are two kinds of societies. One is a sensate society, and that would be the kind of naturalist, materialist sort of view that all that exists, all that is real, is what can be sensed by our five senses. And then there are ideational societies, as he put it, who excuse me, who believe that that the senses, what the senses detect is certainly real, but reality is bigger than just that. It includes things like propositions, numbers, values, moral objectives, etc. And he said his sociological claim was that sensate societies always collapse in upon themselves eventually, because they don't have the intellectual capital to sustain them. A society that doesn't think there's such a thing as justice, let's say, or truth, is just not going to make it. It's just going to be a kind of animal, existence. And if you think, well, okay, yeah, there's something called justice or truth, but we just make it up. It's just the way we prefer things. Well, then you don't really believe in it. This has to be something that is robust enough to capture your loyalty and your commitment. You have to be willing to die for the truth. And if you think it's just a fiction, you're not going to die for it.
Yeah, that's important. So I remember in talking about these things, a couple of things too. Morality in and of itself carries the idea of duty and obligation. So it's true moral statements and moral facts are those which we are beholden to do. So somebody, for example, you hear, and again, internet atheists are always great fodder for these kinds of things, because they'll bring up some of these topics, and one person, pulled back, and I hear this a lot. They quote Hume to you, that David Hume, who famously said, you can't get an is from an ought. And he's trying to reject morality from the fact that, just because it is something that makes people uncomfortable doesn't mean it ought to be that way. And I said, well, in one sense, yes, you're right. But what if morality was always an ought? What if it starts off as an ought? You've not made any case there. And so that's kind of part of the point. I also use the example of I'll paint a picture for people to understand the difference between moral obligations or moral claims versus personal claims. Because when you're talking about constructivist views, they ultimately boil down to what I like, right? They're emotive. They're expressional in the sense that I don't like that, or we as a society don't like that. They're just preferences. They're insulin versus ice cream is the combination, right? That you always hear. You can. It's not correct to say, chocolate ice cream is bad and vanilla ice cream is good in a moral sense. You can say I don't like chocolate. I prefer vanilla, but there's something different between saying that and saying, torturing small children for fun is bad. That's a different claim. So there's an oughtness to this that we're talking about. And if I'm hearing you right, what you're saying is in a constructivist framework where there's no true morality in the universe, or there's nothing based outside of ourselves that makes morality real. It's all just preference. Is that the correct way to say it?
Yeah, basically. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if we can, when we do that, then we can say, well, then might makes right. If it's just all preference, as long as you can get away with it, it's okay, right?
Yeah.
There's just, for example, there was in the news today where the jury came back and convicted the husband in France over the past 20 years, he was drugging his wife, knocking her unconscious, and having people come in and basically raping her. And it's a amazing trial where all 50 of these guys are actually put on trial for rape. But if he would have continued to get away with it and she would have not been the wiser, it really hasn't hurt her, made him money, it's okay because nobody gets hurt, right? It's just the preference of the thing. And how you can hold to that as a human being is just striking. It strikes me that what you try to do is grasp on to this idea, not for reality's sake, but just for an intellectual escape hatch. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, the escape hatch is very convenient in moral issues. You wouldn't do that probably in a mathematical situation. 2 plus 2 is, it's just whatever, I prefer it to be.
Well, yeah, you don't do it when you're actually faced with real danger either.
Yeah.
I had a conversation with an atheist on Berkeley campus once where I was talking to her, and I actually got her down to the fact of she says all moral facts are basically whatever you believe. And I said, wait a minute, if a homeless person who is schizophrenic came right here and grabbed your sister who's standing next to you and wanted to rape her, are you saying that because he truly believed that it would be okay for him? And she said, well, yeah, I guess if he truly believed it. Now, her sister wasn't pleased with that response.
That's right.
And I stepped back. I actually looked her in the eye. I said, you know what? All you're trying to do is win the debate right now. Because if that happens in real life, you're screaming for the police. And sometimes I think we got to call people out on this claim, because I don't think in the real world it works. They're just. Yeah.
And that's, I mean, your tactic is exactly the right one, done sensitively. It's just that, and I think that's the reality of Romans 2 about the natural moral law. nobody really believes that. Nobody really is convinced that that's true. They might want to believe it to win a debate or to justify something that they're doing. But when the guard is down, when you the way I like to think of the natural moral law is you're poking somebody in the chest, and you poke enough, it's going to come out. I have a friend, actually it's a mutual friend, but I won't mention who it is, who was teaching in a secular philosophy class, and it was during the Oklahoma City bombing, and he took a poll in the class of how many of you thought I think earlier in the course he had taken a poll, and a majority of the students, or at least a significant minority, had said that they thought morality was relative. It was whatever you wanted. And then he took the same poll after the Oklahoma City bombing, and everybody thought there was something objectively wrong with what that guy did.
Yeah, especially with the preschool in that building.
Yeah, but then later, one of the young women in the class, and our friend was very sensitive about this, but she had come to him. She had experienced a rape, and was asking for some extra help and so on, and which he was very happy to do. But then she came later to him and said, I was wrong about changing my view on morality in the Oklahoma City case. I now that I've thought about it some more, I'm going to stick to my relativist guns. There really is no truth of the matter. And my friend said, have you dropped the charges against your rapist, who was doing what he wanted to do? And he did it kindly and graciously, but that was a wake-up moment for her. I'm not sure exactly what happened, but that's the right sort of thing. Again, very sensitively.
Yeah.
Because this is just, it's against reality. It's against nature.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so let's turn our attention now to the objectivist framework. There are different subsets within this. Probably one of the most popular, I think, and it does catch a lot of cachet in academic circles, would be utilitarianism. Jeremy Bentham and John Stuart Mill. Of course, the idea here is that what makes it objective is that there's a concept of flourishing, or of happiness, I guess I should say. Got to be careful of my word choice. Of happiness that you can deduct. And as long as you produce the most happiness for the greatest number, then that's what the good is. So, for example, we should have a fire department and a police department. We should lock up criminals because the vast majority of people aren't robbing stores, committing crimes. And if we allow that to happen unchecked, more people are going to be suffering as a result. So therefore, locking up criminals is a good thing, objectively good, because it increases the general happiness of the society. So how does that compare to, say, a Christian understanding of objectivism?
Well, you're right to say that utilitarianism is a form of objectivism. So just to clarify, the objectivist versus subjectivist relativist distinction is a metaethical distinction about the status of moral values and properties and obligations. An objectivist says that their existence is independent of the way we think about them. They're not just a function of our preferences or endorsements or something like that. Whereas all forms of constructivism, including relativism, would say no, the existence of moral objectives or moral values and obligations and so on is simply a function of our endorsements or preferences or something. We make it. we make these things right or wrong by the way we think about them. So within objectivism now, then there are some different, and here's a technical term now, normative ethical views. So metaethics is about the foundations of the house. Normative ethics is about the house. And so utilitarians are in the house. And you're right, they're objectivists. They think there's a right or wrong answer, and it's not just how we happen to think about it. So they have a very specific way of navigating inside the house, so to speak. And some of it is, from a Christian perspective, I think the best way to think about utilitarianism is it's a secularized version of a love your neighbor as yourself ethic. And there are a number of philosophers of history who would argue that that's exactly what it is. It's picking up on the Christian value of benevolence and doing good to other people and saying, let's make morality all about that, and let's forget God. Let's forget all the theistic, assumptions about anything. And so it has to. We can't love our neighbors like Christianity says, which is to love them as ourselves, as created by God, and therefore there's limits on what we can do to them. We have to welcome them as bearing the image of God, and so on. We have to respect them. Utilitarians don't want to say that. They just want to say everybody is a unit of possible beneficiary of producing maximum amount of good in the world. And to some extent that's right. I mean, a good reason to have a fire department is because it's a good way to help people, and to protect people and so on. It brings value into the world. Where utilitarianism goes really wrong, though, is that it views each person as one unit of the beneficiary, and there's all kinds of unjust things you could do to kind of maximize the benefit to people. So, for example, if you were to say, look, if we locked up all the people of a certain race, let's say, and they're a minority, it would make everybody else ever so much more happy. In fact, if we tortured those people, that minority, it would make all these other people really happy. And as long as the happiness of all those other people outweighs the unhappiness of the minority group, it's actually morally justified under utilitarianism. So it's a completely end justifies the means sort of system, where as long as the end is good enough, any means is justified. Whereas I think we would want to say, in some cases, the end does justify the means. Like if you're a doctor and someone comes in with a gangrenous leg, the best thing you can do is take that thing off. Now, that's not a good thing in and of itself, is removing somebody's leg, but it's justified because of the circumstances. But not just anything is justified. If there's and so torturing and
well, let's use I'll use one example that's what I would say. So say we talk about the fire department. Fire department's necessary. If there is a shortage of firefighters, does it make sense to send 2 or 3 firefighters into a life-risking situation in order to rescue an 89-year-old woman whose life is almost over anyway, or doesn't it make more sense to reserve those firefighters to fight fires for another day so that more people could flourish? that kind of thing. Here's a real world example. The University of Columbia Medical School, some doctors there did a couple of interesting things. They said, we know that people sign organ donor cards and things in order to donate their organs in case they are incapacitated and things like that. And what would happen if we have a female who has been, considered in a persistent vegetative state or perhaps brain dead, what have you? What if we used her as a gestational surrogate? We know that we can keep babies growing in women who have comas and such like that. Why can't we use wombs of women to grow surrogate children? And because of pressure from the outside, they were forced to retract that. But it strikes me that in a utilitarian system, not only is that, quote, good, you're actually obligated to do that, because the person who's unconscious has no way to be more happy but you're providing supposedly benefits to other people. You are obligated in a utilitarian system to create these zombie mothers.
Yeah.
That's scary.
That is. Yeah. Yeah. And that's exactly the sort of thing that utilitarianism can't give the right answer to. And it's because of the secularized thing, because it's one thing to say, yeah, we should love people and we should try to bring benefit into the world. But from a Christian perspective, there are certain things you should not do to people, even to bring benefit into the world, right? You should not exploit somebody like that. You should not violate an individual like that, even if it would, promises to bring about some good things in the world. And so the way I like to put it is, utilitarianism is all engine and no brakes. There's no constraints on what you could do to try this big machine kind of plowing through the world to try to give benefit. And so from a Christian perspective, we want to benefit people, of course, but there are limits on what we would, we should also respect people. We should also tell the truth. We should also seek justice. None of those things actually does utilitarianism have much of a place for. If you have two situations where telling the truth would bring about, benefit X, and lying would bring about benefit X plus 1, you're obligated to do X, to lie. Or if it's just even the same, if it brings about the same benefit to tell the truth or tell a lie, then it's arbitrary, morally arbitrary in utilitarianism. But we want to say, no, it's not arbitrary at all. It's actually, you should tell the truth.
Okay, so you brought up lying, and I know that somebody who's watching this is immediately going to go to Anne Frank or, are you saying that lying is a good thing? And what about lying? Doesn't Christianity hold that you have to lie as well to save the Jews in the attic? What's the difference between the utilitarian X plus 1 lie versus the Christian standing in that situation?
Well, it's probably overly ambitious to say the Christian standing in this, because
fair enough.
Have differing views on this. But from a utilitarian point of view, and Frank has to calculate, or the situation, whoever is talking to the Nazis at the door has to calculate what's going to bring about the greatest benefit in the world. And, that's going to be a function of a lot of things. But presumably you would want to say, well, it'd be better for these poor people that are in my basement, these Jews that are in my basement, if they're not killed. And so it would seem, I think probably for a utilitarian, you could probably say, well, yeah, you should lie to save these lives. Now, from a Christian perspective, you might arrive at the same conclusion, but say it's not merely a matter of calculating numbers here. It's a matter of more basic, more fundamental obligations that I have. I have an obligation to preserve human life, the life of the innocent, and that outweighs maybe my obligation to tell the truth, especially if I think of it in terms of telling, that these are people. What some Christians would say, there's a difference that our obligation to tell the truth is not utterly independent from the context in which we're doing it. And somebody who is seeking to kill innocent people is not someone who I'm obligated now to tell the truth to. It presupposes a kind of proper sort of context.
Yeah, there's
I owe people the truth.
There's gradations of good, and we want to exercise the greatest good. And the greatest good is different than the greatest happiness. And it may simply be that there's a fundamental difference between those two things. So, okay, so we've talked about utilitarianism. We haven't quite delved completely into Christian morality, but what are some other objectivist frameworks other than those that we may run across?
Well, there are. I mean, it depends on how you slice the pie. Like again, if we're talking about normative ethical frameworks, then there are different systems, like Kantianism. So that comes from Immanuel Kant, and it's a very different animal than utilitarianism. It's the opposite of utilitarianism in many ways. But Kant says there's basically a kind of rational structure to morality that if I'm thinking about what to do, I formulate the thought about what to do. He called it a maxim. And if I can universalize that, that is, if I can will that whatever I intend to do, I will that everyone does it, sort of like a golden rule, then it's right. And if I can't do that, then it's wrong. And that is attractive to many people because it's the opposite. It's so non-utilitarian. It's so objectivist in that I could easily be wrong. It doesn't matter what I really want to do or what I prefer to do. It's what is logically consistent that I can not only will that I do it, but that everybody does it. And that's a kind of objective, that's brakes. That's a brakes on it, on my possible action. But as I would critique Kantianism as it's all brakes and no engine, because it doesn't really give us then the only thing really that utilitarian gives us, which is an impulse to try to make the world a better place. It's just all about boundaries, and don't do this. And there are other very technical problems with it, but Kant was explicit that it was his attempt to kind of create a Christian morality, not a Christian morality of benefit to people, but a Christian morality of obligations and duties, without the Christian basis, without God. And it's ingenious. But it's at the end of the day, for all kinds of reasons, inadequate, I think.
Okay.
One thing being is it doesn't really give us a reason to actually love people and serve people. It's don't treat them as means to ends.
Where does Ayn Rand fit in this? She leans more Kantian, doesn't she?
No, I wouldn't say that. I would say she's more toward the utilitarian side, but with a huge difference because she hated utilitarianism.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So, but she doesn't think there are duties that bind us. She's an egoist. So if we think, here's where I think it's similar to utilitarianism. If we think of utilitarianism as they have some notion of what they call good, pleasure or happiness in their understanding of it, and then whatever you do to maximize that for everybody, that's what's right. Well, Rand has the view that they're similar sort of structure. There's this thing that she thinks is good, which is self-interest. And then whatever I can do, just for me, not for anybody else, whatever I can do to maximize that is what's right.
Okay.
So what she didn't like about the utilitarians is that they ended up just kind of getting rid of the individual, even the agent, because I'm just one of everybody. Rand said, I'm the only one, and I need to maximize my own self-interest. So it's also an objectivist view because it's not merely because she had an objective view of human functioning. She said we can look at it scientifically and we can see how humans function. And the only moral duty is to maximize that.
Okay. Yeah. So in all of these now with Christianity, there's a fundamental difference, and it's how does Christian morality understand its grounding? Because this is another thing again that when we talk with folks, when we talk with atheists, they seem to confuse the metaethical question with the ethical question in itself. What do you mean atheists can't be ethical? It's not that you can't be ethical. It's that you don't have any good grounding for your ethics. And these are kind of the problem points that we've been pointing out. So how does Christianity then hold all this together?
Yeah, no, that's an important point, Lenny, about and I think there's a lot of common ground that Christians have normatively with people, normative ethics. Even with, again, I think that utilitarians get some things right, and I think it's because utilitarians are created in the image of God too. Kantians get some things right. Both of them suffer from wanting to make it secularized, and it's just not able to be sufficient. But they can get onto some good things. And in fact, whatever their normative ethical views are, there are people who are atheists and who do good things and do right things, and that have character. In some cases, character that we can learn from, we can admire. Again, it's because they're made in the image of God. So the big question really is the metaethical question. Okay, so what is the foundation here that's underlying your understanding of goodness and rightness and obligation and so on? And you might have some good stuff there, but it's insufficient. It's not fully grounded. So from a Christian perspective, our what we call in the book, our common moral experience. That is, if you look at, and this is relevant to something we were talking about at the very beginning, if you look throughout the history of philosophy and you look at what even critics of moral realism, critics of Christian ethics like J.L. Mackie, he says, no, this is the view of most people. It's built into our moral language. It's built into our moral concepts. It's built into the history of philosophy, of Plato and Aristotle and Kant, all these guys, that reality is morality is a real thing. It's objective. It's not merely a function of how we like to think about it. It's factual. It's when we make a moral judgment, like it's wrong to torture children for fun. that's a statement that's true or false, and we all are absolutely convinced it's true. Um, and so that's what we call common moral experience. It's a shared, generally shared view that everybody, including the critics, agree is the way most people think of it. It's the way most thoughtful people have thought about it. So now we ask, so that's what that's pointing to is what we call moral realism. That is that morality is real, moral values, moral facts, art, moral properties are real parts of the world. They are objective. That moral judgments are cognitive, that is, that they're true or false, and that there, we can know morality. That's all moral realism. So our common moral experience points to moral realism, and as we seek to show in the book, moral realism points to grounding in a kind of theistic grounding, because some people are moral realists. They want to affirm these things, but they want to be philosophical naturalists and say, no, there's no God, and so on. These are just brute facts that emerge somehow in a process that nobody can explain when people are highly evolved enough, and they just exist, and there are these moral duties, and they're just things that are there. And as some philosophers said, they're like duties that are floating around waiting to be obeyed. It's like, why should we think they're real? I mean, what's the explanation? Maybe it's possible that they just exist. But if you want to ask, okay, what's the best explanation? What kind of worldview actually makes sense out of this, where you would expect to find it? It would be a worldview in which ultimate reality is not just bare stuff, and it's not even a set of principles. Ultimate reality is a person, a moral person. In fact, it's a triune, it's a trinity of loving relationships. I mean, that's actually the sort of picture of reality where morality goes deep. It's exactly what we would expect to find. And so from a Christian perspective, morality is responding to God. It's responding in gratitude and obedience, and seeing morality is not the only thing in the world. It's not even necessarily the most important thing in the world. It's a hugely important thing, but it's one way that we respond to God in gratitude and obedience, and it works together with our spiritual needs, our emotional needs, as well as our moral needs.
Yeah, we talked with Adam Johnson on his book Divine Love Theory,
Yeah.
which is a kind of a similar idea.
Yeah.
In that.
Yeah. So moral realism points to a theistic basis, but and that would be great. But I think what Adam Johnson has successfully argued is that there's a kind of theistic basis, a Christian theistic basis, a Trinitarian theistic basis that is better than just theism. Because relationality and mutual love and reciprocity is in the deepest heart of things. It's not just a kind of mysterious thing. Well, why? Even if it could exist, and it's not clear that on a naturalist view, these things could even exist. But supposing they do, they're ungrounded. They're just floating about. And so if you follow the kind of strategy of inference to the best explanation, okay, we've got these phenomena, we've got these things to be explained. What's the best explanation? It's just really clear.
Right.
So then it gives us a ground for obligation, as you were talking about, because we are obligated to our Creator and our benefactor.
Well, let's take a contrary view, though. Let's look at an Eastern philosophy. The idea that there is a law of karma. This law seems to be etched into the universe. It seems to be something that from which no one can escape. So there is an objective nature to it. But I've always had the problem with the Eastern views, and it seems like the idea of progression, of again reliving and experiencing the suffering in order to advance to a state of nirvana, whatever way you define that. The problem is somebody's making judgments. The karmic law somehow is saying this is good and this is bad, but I don't know where those judgments are. I don't know what the function is that's doing the judging. And how do we parse that out? What do you see as the problems of objectivism in an Eastern framework?
Well, it's really interesting. You've probably thought about it more than I have, but I think you're right. There are actually there seem to be moral judgments or value judgments, shall we say, of good and evil here that underwrite this whole thing. And but what's the grounding for that? What kind of picture of ultimate reality makes sense out of that? And one kind of interesting thing is in a lot of the Eastern views, the more monistic ones, in Hinduism, for example, ultimately all distinctions are unreal. They're can't remember what the right word is.
The way they say you are like a drop of water, and your goal is to lose yourself into part of the sea.
So there's no real distinction between you and anything else, but there's also no real Maya. That's the word I was looking for. It's an illusion. So, the proper state of consciousness is one in which all individuality dissolves away, all particularities are gone, and you see that there's a single undifferentiated oneness. Well, then, the distinction between good and evil is an illusion.
Right.
And so the whole basis of having a morality, which rides on the distinction between good and evil, morality itself is ultimately an illusion. So that's not a basis for morality. That's a denial of morality. It's a removal of morality.
Yeah, ultimately, morality itself isn't real in that regard. And Buddhism, in some sense, although the idea of Buddhism is to be, like a candle snuffed out, right? While Hinduism, you join into the whole, you kind of decrease. I don't know if those are distinctions without a difference ultimately, but it still has this problem, and even the Brahman can't escape karma. So to me, karma falls into this Euthyphro dilemma problem, and you have to say, well, then again, what grounds goodness? How does it how does it distinguish, or how does it be? How does it become in that regard?
Yeah, and I mean, it sounds like it might not. I mean, it might be calling it good and evil and so on, but if it's just a kind of non-personal churning of things, reciprocity, if you acted this way, then you're going to get this. It's not clear that at all that you could make a distinction between good and evil there. It's just sameness or something like that.
Yeah. This is why I've wrestled with it myself, trying to say I just don't understand ultimately how it can be a foundation of a moral system.
Yeah.
So one of the things that let's do a hypothetical. Let's say there's a capacity to do something that even in the maybe by yourself, maybe there's the idea of doing good just for the sake of doing good, say lying on your taxes. Maybe it doesn't change your tax return or something like that. Maybe it doesn't make you pay more, but there's a concept within Christendom that you shouldn't lie, because lying itself is wrong. As we say, it's objectively wrong. And even if it doesn't affect other people, you still don't do it because it's not what God would have done in your stead. Are there other systems that offer that same kind of framework?
Well, Kantianism would say something like that, I think. It wouldn't say because it's not
But
what God
Kantianism
did.
won't have any exceptions, right? It will,
Right.
like
There's no
lying is
exception.
always wrong. Hey, if the Jews are in
Yeah.
the attic, give them up. That kind of thing.
But the sort of maybe a more common, I don't know if this would fit what you're looking for, but maybe a more common uh, scenario that a utilitarian might use is, well, look, if I lie on my taxes, I will benefit. And, I'm a really smart guy and I'm not going to get caught. So and it's not going to really affect anybody else because I'm just one of 300 million tax filers in the United States, let's say, right? So the overall, uh, Ayn Rand would say, yes, you should do it. If you know you're not going to get caught, man, do it. You maximize self-interest. Utilitarian would say, well, uh, is there any reason to think that it's going to affect other people? No.
Yeah,
Well,
if I can lie on my taxes in order to give to another charity, right, to use the extra money to feed more
yeah,
people.
yeah. I mean, look at how much better off I will be that I can produce then in the future more happiness. It's sort of like the firemen, right? Get rid of these old people in the burning building because some of the other people that we save might actually produce good to society. So yeah, I'll be in a much better state to produce good benefits to people if I cheat on my taxes here, and it's really not going to hurt anybody. Well, from a utilitarian point of view, it seems like well then you'd be justified to do that and maybe obligated to do it. So for a Kantian would say, no, this is exactly what we're opposed to because it's unfair. And see, that's something that utilitarians don't have, and that's what Ayn Rand doesn't have. But Kantians, that's their big deal. It's not fair. I'm treating myself differently than I would treat everybody else, and I should not do anything that I wouldn't want everybody else to do. Even if they aren't going to do it. It's a thought experiment. So, that's one of those things that Kant was trying to capture about Christian morality without the Christianity. Is in this really robust view of justice and fairness.
Yeah.
And his thought experiment is a good one in some ways. I mean, it's a helpful one. Say, okay, would I want everybody to do this? And no, okay, well then I shouldn't do it.
Okay, so as we get ready to wrap up, let me ask you a couple of kind of more practical questions.
Okay.
First of all, where does this play out? How do we use this? How is this more than just kind of abstract knowledge? Oh, does this influence legislation? Does this influence how we treat other people? How do we take this idea of metaethics, grounding the good in God, and kind of use it on the street, so to speak?
Well, I don't know about how we use it on the street, but I'll respond to maybe we can get there. Respond to an earlier point made, which was about what difference does it make, for people in legislation or whatever. And in the book, we cite a study by some psychologists who say that the three major causes for the current massive increase in anxiety and depression is the fast pace of life and stress, our individualism, our excessive individualism, lack of community, and the conviction that moral relativism is the only moral option. Isn't that interesting? Well, that's metaethics right there. Um, there's there's the sense that if this is all just, up to me, or just up to preferences in my society or whatever, it's not real. And that's just not going to guide me. That's not going to anchor me. Um, Martin Seligman, who's another psychologist, writing back in the 80s, said that the main reason that young people today are 10 times more susceptible to anxiety and depression is because in the past, people saw life as an arena in which you live for something that's bigger than you are and more important than you are. Well, another way to say that is something objective, something objectively good, objectively right. And as that has all just been kind of, flattened out, it's like we're lost. We don't have moorings and so on. So in terms of what difference it makes a huge difference in individual people's lives. And so it's worth it for us as Christians to want to help people have an objective grounding for their understanding of morality, not just to win points for them to them, but for their benefit, for their sake, for their flourishing, for their objective flourishing. That this is actually just like we would want people to operate in reality when it comes to their physical well-being, and not just, it doesn't matter what I eat or what I do with my body because it's just up to me, it's just like my ice cream. Well, it actually does matter. If we love people, we care about how they live. And so it's sort of like Sorokin's thing about societies collapsing that don't have any kind of robust commitment to moral values and ideals. So that's practical.
That's interesting. There's a sociology study, and I cannot remember the name to cite it, but I know that they looked at like younger children playing in front yards, and yards that were fenced, children tended to be more gregarious, more active, because the safety of the border itself gave them a confidence to explore even to the edges of the yard. You take the fence away, and all of a sudden you get less motion, less movement, less understanding, because they don't want to, venture into the street, so to speak.
Yeah.
So,
and if you've ever tried to play tennis without a fence around the court, you've experienced the same thing, right? You're not going to go for it. You're going to be very careful, and so fences are good things. Objective constraints are good things.
And we seem to be wired that way. Paul Young, I know he was a sociologist out of Yale, I believe, who did experiments with children as young as 18 months, Punch and Judy, puppetry, and taking away balls. And we just have this built-in moral sense, even pre-verbal, that we can sense, and we get anxiety when we see wrong things done to others.
Yeah,
so.
Exactly. And it does not help to grow up and take a class and learn that this is all a fiction. This is not making us less anxious. This is just making it worse. This is just saying, well, all those fences that you intuit, that you have a natural sense that are there, they're not real. They're just, figments of your imagination or leftovers from bad religion or something. That's actually not helping people.
So to go back to the student example that you gave, where she was trying to revert back to a relativist framework, when you teach these classes, when you get kids who are coming in, even Christian kids, a lot of them have swallowed the moral relativist understanding just because it's in the ethos, it's in the air. Do you find that examining these things can change a lot of minds? Is there something more personal you need to do? How do you see in these discussions? How do you change people's beliefs to something a little bit more objectivist?
Well, I mean, I teach it, and I think that does change minds. I mean, some people have said that because they just don't understand it. There's so many misconceptions about it, you know. For a quick example, people think, well, if I think that morality is objective, then that's intolerant, you know, because that means certain things are wrong, certain people are wrong, and I just can't go there. And so I call that a wheelbarrow that's doing a bunch of work, derailing conversation, you know, good thought. And so the tolerance thing is something that has to be brought up at some point and say, okay, what is it? What is tolerance really? Because it's just as long as it's vague and it's in the background, then it's just gonna keep people from being able to recognize and affirm that, yeah, their morality is objective. So you have to deal with those, bring them to the surface. Scientism is another one, that all that we can really know, all that's real is what science can tell us. And of course, science can't tell us morality, so that must not be real. So we have to deal with scientism. We talk about that in the book some. And then at some point, though, and it's usually, you know, in personal conversation like that student I was talking about, it may be you need to poke a little more, strategically, and take a chance if it's a kind of hard-boiled person. I'll just mention in a class, I had a group. I had one year in this one class, I had a group of students that were kind of into postmodern relativism, and so I thought I'm gonna do one of those things for the class. So they had written this paper. So my TA and I brought in all the papers, the graded papers. That was back when you do it, with actual paper.
Manually, yeah.
Yeah, can you believe that? Some people listening to this might remember that, but
Analog.
yeah. So on the back, on the really good papers, we put the correct grade, A or whatever, and then on the front we put F or D minus or something like that. And I handed them out, and I said, and I was just making this up as I went, but I said, I was really disappointed in these papers. I mean, they were well written, well argued, really convincing, but I just had to give him an F. And why did you give him an F? I said, well, because I didn't like the font you used. And so then they're looking through the syllabus, It doesn't say anything in here about font. I said, well, why would I put it in the syllabus? I mean, I never know from day to day what kind of font I'm gonna like. Yeah, but that's not fair. I said, fair? Are you really interested in objective moral values now? Because I thought you thought this was just a construction that, and I said, welcome to the world of relativism. I'm the professor, I have the power, and what I say goes. And that's all. That's the end of the debate. We can't appeal to things like fairness, truth. Those are objective moral values. And then I said, and oh, by the way, it was just a joke. The right scores on the back. But I think it was a wake-up call for a number of them. It was, again, one of those kind of vivid things that sometimes you have to do to just kind of, oh yeah, that's what this actually amounts to.
Yeah, it's an actual entire package. You can't pick and choose.
Yeah.
That's part. Well, David, thank you so much. The book is Metaethics, a short companion. It's part of the Essentials in Christian Ethics series put out by B&H academic J.P. Moreland and Dr. David Horner are the authors. We will put a link to the book in the description here so you can grab it. If you want a reference for this kind of thing, good, strong foundation, this is definitely the book to get. Any closing thoughts before we sign off?
Well, I'll just reiterate that our common moral experience, kind of our deepest awareness of morality, points to moral realism. That morality is real, it's objective, we can know it, and that points to a kind of robust understanding of a robust Christian realism as the best and most satisfying and fulfilling basis for understanding and actually living morality.
Well, thanks so much. Now, you've done a lot of work on the transcendentals as well. We're going to have to bring you back to talk about that, maybe how the medievals understood truth, goodness, and beauty, and those kinds of things next time. But so, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
All right.
Thanks.
Thank you for watching this Come Reason video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you'd like to see more videos like these, consider subscribing to our Come Reason YouTube channel by clicking on the subscribe button. And you can follow us on social media. Lastly, if you'd like to help keep these kinds of videos free, consider providing a donation by clicking on the donation button beside me. Thank you.